Kiev, 1942. The city is a graveyard of dreams, suffocating under the iron fist of Nazi occupation. But in the midst of hunger and fear, a group of bakery workers, former football stars, decided to do the unthinkable. They didn't pick up guns, they picked up a football. This is the story of Start FC, the team that played for their lives, and the match that Hitler's officers couldn't afford to lose. By the summer of 1942, Kiev was a shadow of its former self. Football was the last thing on anyone's mind. Survival was the only goal. Nikolai Trusevich, the legendary goalkeeper of Dynamo Kiev, was homeless and starving, working as a simple laborer in Bakery No. 1. But fate had other plans. Slowly, he began to find his old teammates among the ruins. One by one, they gathered at the bakery: Mykola Korotkik, Mikhail Putistin, and Ivan Kuzmenko. They were shadows of the athletes they once were, thin, pale, and exhausted. But when they found an old deflated ball in the back of the bakery, something changed. For a brief moment, they weren't slaves of the occupation. They were kings of the pitch again. They called their team Start. It was more than a name, it was a promise. Their training ground was a dirt lot, and their fuel was scraps of bread. But when the German authorities organized a local league to show normalcy under Nazi rule, they made a fatal mistake. They allowed Start FC to play. They wanted to show German superiority through sport, but they didn't realize they had just invited a group of lions to a cage match. The first game was against the Hungarians. Start FC didn't just win, they dominated. And that's when the trouble really began. The legend of Start FC began to grow like wildfire. They didn't just win, they dominated. In their first few matches, they scored 37 goals and conceded only 8. They defeated the Hungarian garrison 6-2, then humiliated the Romanian military team 11-0. The local citizens of Kiev began to stand taller, finding their lost pride in every goal scored. But the German high command was watching. To them, this wasn't sport, it was a rebellion. They decided to send their finest, most elite team, Flakelf, composed of the best Luftwaffe pilots and anti-aircraft soldiers. The first match against Flakelf ended in another crushing victory for Start FC, 5-1. The Nazis were shocked. The master race had been defeated by starving bakery workers. The German authorities realized that as long as Start FC kept winning, the occupation's image was in danger. They demanded a rematch. But this time, it wouldn't be just a game, it would be an ultimatum. The rematch was set for August 9th, 1942, but days before the whistle, the players of Start FC received a visitor. It wasn't an athlete, it was a high-ranking officer of the Gestapo. The atmosphere froze. With cold, menacing eyes, the officer delivered a simple, brutal ultimatum. You must lose the match. If you win, you will be executed. The threat hung heavy in the air. The players knew it wasn't a bluff. They went home to their families, faced with the impossible choice: save their lives or preserve their honor. The entire city held its breath. The match had transformed from a sporting event into a battle for Ukraine's very soul. And on that fateful afternoon, Start FC walked onto the pitch, fully aware they might never walk off. The stadium was packed, but the air was thick with a deadly silence. On one side, the Flakelf, well-fed, elite soldiers of the Luftwaffe. On the other, Start FC, starving bakers playing for their lives. The referee, an SS officer, entered the dressing room one last time to remind them: salute the German way before the match starts. But as the teams lined up, Start FC did the unthinkable. Instead of the Nazi salute, they put their hands on their hearts and shouted their own slogan. The crowd gasped. The match began with brutal intensity. The German players used their boots like weapons, kicking and injuring the Ukrainians, knowing the referee would never blow the whistle against them. By halftime, Start FC was trailing behind. They were bleeding, bruised and broken. In the locker room, another officer entered. This is your last chance. Lose or face the consequences. The halftime whistle felt like a funeral bell. Inside the locker room, the silence was broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and the dripping of blood on the wooden floor. They were losing 3-2. One player looked at his shattered shin, another at his bruised ribs. Then the door creaked open. Another German official stepped in. He didn't scream. He whispered, "You know what happens if you win. Think of your families. Think of your lives. The Third Reich does not lose." But as the official left, Trucevic stood up. He didn't look like a baker anymore. He looked like a giant. He told his men, "If we lose on purpose, we die inside forever. If we win, we may die, but we die as men." No more words were needed. They walked back onto the pitch under the scorching August sun. The second half was a slaughter, not of bodies, but of spirits. Start FC played like possessed men. They moved the ball with a speed the Germans couldn't follow. Goal after goal, the stadium erupted in forbidden cheers. 3-3, then 4-3. The Nazis were terrified. Finally, the legendary striker Klimenko dribbled past the entire German defense and even the goalkeeper. He stood alone in front of an empty net. He could have scored, but instead he turned around and kicked the ball back to the center of the pitch, mocking the master race. It was the ultimate insult. The final whistle blew. 5-3. Start FC had won. They had chosen their fate. The silence that followed the final whistle was more terrifying than the match itself. Start FC had won 5-3, but as they walked off the pitch, they didn't celebrate. They knew, one by one, in the following weeks, the Gestapo came for them. Nikolai Korotkik was the first. He was tortured and killed in a Gestapo prison. The others were sent to the Serets concentration camp, a place where hope went to die. Even there, starving and exhausted, they remained defiant. They were forced to work in brutal conditions, but they carried the memory of that match like a shield. In February 1943, after a conflict at the camp, the Nazis decided to execute the prisoners. Nikolai Trucevic, the legendary goalkeeper, was ordered to kneel. He refused. He stood tall in his red goalkeeper jersey, the same one he wore during the death match. His last words were, "Football will never die." A few moments later, the shots rang out. Most of the team was gone, but their story was just beginning. They died as players, but they were reborn as eternal symbols of resistance. For decades, the story of the death match was told in whispers. The Soviet Union turned them into martyrs, and the world saw them as heroes. Today, outside the Dynamo Stadium in Kyiv, a massive stone monument stands, not to celebrate a victory on the scoreboard, but a victory of the human spirit. These men weren't just footballers, they were the soul of a city that refused to break. They showed us that even in the darkest hours of history, when everything is taken away from you, your home, your food, your freedom, you still own your dignity. When you look at a football pitch today, remember Start FC, remember that red jersey. Because of them, we know that football is more than just a game. It is a language of resistance. It is the refusal to bow down. And as long as their story is told, the players of the deathmatch will never truly be gone. They didn't just play for a win, they played for eternity.